You are listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
And we're kicking it right off with our first guest, Pete Sepp, who's the Executive Vice President with the National Taxpayers Union. And, of course, it means something to me because I spent 10 years preparing tax returns. Let me tell you something. The first thing we should do, Pete, is get rid of the tax code. But we can't do that, so let's get into something that we can handle at this moment.
Well, the first thing I have to say to you is my condolences. I'm glad you're in a new profession. This is a really tough thing, and politically as well as economically, it's a necessary thing to do. We have put up with an impossibly convoluted tax code for far too long.
Yes, let me tell you, the definition of insanity is doing something over and over and over again.
Yes.
And I decided for myself that staying in that profession was kind of suicide for myself. And the problem is you have those who prepare tax returns, those who understand the net result, but then you have those in Washington, D.C. who are writing the tax code. And somewhere lost in translation are the hundreds of millions of Americans who are supposed to maneuver through the system. And we're at a time today where the accountants and the attorneys can't even do it.
Yes, absolutely. And there are stories after stories of these tests that Money Magazine, for example, used to administer to 10, 20 different kinds of tax preparers, and they would each come up with a different answer. Well, Money no longer does those tests, but there have been recent tests by PC World and others who have tried to work even through software and have come up with different answers. Now, that's a frightening thing because you think, well, perhaps we're talking about simple human interpretations of the tax laws. Well, when the software starts generating different answers, granted, it was programmed by human beings, but you'd expect to get more consistency out of it.
Have you ever tried using some of the store-bought software programs?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Now, I worked at a firm that, thank God, spent a lot of money on their software, and I didn't have a lot of issues, and we also had a good service. If you did have a programming issue, you had somewhere to call to deal with it. But we have a greater issue than that, and it's just the system.
Yeah. And, when you add it all up, and this is according to something called the Information Collection Budget of the United States, over 6 billion hours of the federal government's total paperwork burden is attributable to the tax system, personal income, corporate income, and to a much lesser degree, things like excises. That's roughly 3/4 of the entire paperwork burden of the federal government. We think, well, OSHA and the EPA and the whole alphabet soup of federal agencies, they must be significant contributors to the overhead of businesses. Well, they are, but they don't come close to the tax system.
Yeah, that's right. And then you have the issue of state versus federal taxation. And I think, it's interesting. You can control what happens within your state to some degree because somebody's accountable to you. I don't think that Congress is accountable to the people anymore. So as that tax code grows, it actually puts a bigger burden on the state these days. I think we've actually grown a system that's kind of taken off on its own.
Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately, because so many of the state systems, as far as those who have income taxes, are based on the federal model, what happens in Washington trickles down to their tax codes. And there are some states that go even further than that. If you take a look at Ohio, for example, some 600 jurisdictions at the municipal level have income taxes, and many of them operate under varied definitions of personal income, give different credits to businesses. It's a nightmare of compliance.
That's absolutely correct. Let me just take one piece of the tax code, which always, since it came about, Section 199, the domestic productive. Go talk to a member of Congress, and those who know about it will look at you and shake their head because they understand that it's something that never should have happened.
Yes.
But the reason I bring this up is when that happened, we were like, what is this and why? But then we went to the classes where we were supposed to learn about it so we could actually prepare one. And I just remember I was looking around a room, looking at the heads of guys who were in the business for 10 or 20 years longer than I was. They were as confused as could be. They still don't know how to do it. today.
Yeah, I believe it. And, Section 199 was created to take the edge off the corporate tax system as a poor substitute for low rates, which is what they should have been doing.
Reducing the rate, right?
Yeah, that's what they should have been doing all along. And, of course, many politicians want it this way because we're seeing this right now with the oil and gas companies. They say, well, we want to keep Section 199 in place, but we're going to have a lower rate of deduction for oil and gas. Well, that's how it started. Now they want to take it away for them entirely. Why not just strip the whole thing out for everybody and make a corresponding rate reduction?
Pete, one of the things that really concerns me about the way the tax code is used is, by design, it's manipulation, often institutionalized corruption.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
But when you think about business, there's two challenges here. Some businesses are extremely capital intensive and require very long-term planning, like the utility industry, that I'm very familiar with. As a software entrepreneur, other businesses move at the speed of light,
yes,
and the tax codes are enacted, and then they never go away.
Yes.
Isn't this an enormous problem with the entire process, the way it's conducted?
Yeah, it certainly is. It's a deadweight loss to innovation in our economy when companies have to have huge departments of accountants just trying to keep up with the laws, and they don't understand what's going on because the IRS won't explain it to them. I mean, that's the other thing here. The Internal Revenue Service itself can give bad advice both to individuals and to businesses, and sometimes won't guarantee it unless it's provided in writing or in a private letter ruling.
In dealing with the IRS, you're almost assured that you will not get anything accomplished.
Yeah.
It costs so much money to correct mistakes which are often theirs. And, just take the case of an individual. Somebody makes $50,000 a year. They have a W-2 and a couple other things. It's a very simple return. It should be a matter of like a one-page form, really.
Yes.
So then they go pay an accountant, a couple $100, $1,000, whatever it is. The return gets prepared. Something somehow gets entered incorrectly in the system, which is known to happen, where something just disappears, which is known to happen. They get a letter from the IRS. They have to respond to it. They try to do it themselves. Never gets resolved. They have to go hire an accountant to go do it. Of course, the accountant's happy because he has more work. But at the end of the day, it's a lot of money for process and something that shouldn't happen in the first place.
Yes.
But quite often, these people will get a letter down the road because somehow the correction disappears.
Yes.
It happens in a state level. It happens at a county level. It happens on the federal level all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's sort of a point of no return that many businesses go by. This is my fear with the small businesses especially. Many of them, and they've told me this, they will telephone us, email us with their tax situations, and they'll say, look, I was audited, and the IRS decided to disallow one of my deductions, charge me about $5,000 in tax and penalty. At that point, I have to weigh the cost of hiring an attorney, going to tax court, challenging and knowing I can win, but paying perhaps more than what the IRS wanted in the first place just to defend myself in court. So they go ahead and pay it, and then the Internal Revenue Service says, aha, these businesses are getting away with cheating on taxes.
Now, quick final question, Pete, for you is, one of the biggest challenges is that it's one of the only things where you're actually guilty until proven innocent.
Yes.
How scary is that when you consider the expanded breadth and reach of the IRS due to Obamacare?
Yeah, it's going to be incredible. The IRS is going to have to contend with a totally new definition of income for purposes of the health care law and the exchanges, and the Taxpayer Advocate Service, which is supposed to represent the common taxpayer in a lot of the IRS's policies, was shut out of the entire implementation process for Obamacare. So we're going to see a nasty set of rules come about through that. And, people still fear the IRS greatly. I'll close with one thing. There was a poll taken right after the anthrax attacks back in 2002, I believe it was, by McKenna Research, and they found that by a 50 to 32% margin, more people feared getting an IRS audit notice in the mail than getting anthrax in the mail. And you can chuckle, and we all do, but you think that was in the midst of fear that was gripping America, and still the IRS was more feared than terrorism.
We chuckle because we were among them.
Yes.
Pete Sepp, Executive Vice President with the National Taxpayer Union. Please provide your website for our listeners.
NTU, our initials for National Taxpayers Union, NTU.org.
Great. Pleasure to have you.
Take care.